Right, morning you lot. This poem is actually one of my favourites, so I will happily and confidently teach you guys a little bit about this poem. So Seamus Heaney, he is someone who actually died recently, so he is one of the the poem's more of a modern one compared to the others in the cluster. I'll give you a really quick summary so that you just understand it. First of all, it's a parent-child relationship. So you might want to put that at the top. I know I've not necessarily been that consistent with the other poems which I've helped you to analyse, but it is always good just to put either if it's a parent-child relationship at the top or if it's a romantic relationship, and then you automatically, when you're going to revise, you'll have that instant difference or comparison, similarity or difference. Anyway, so the summary of this poem is essentially it's this man who is basically looking back on his past and the past which he had with his father who he obviously really idolized, which means that they kind of respected them, but almost in a godlike sense, something which they aspire to be, someone who they want to be in the future. So this man is looking back at his past of when he was with his dad on the farm, and how he always used to aspire to be as hardworking and as diligent and as committed as his father is, and physical as father is with the job on the farm. Because of the age and his lack of maturity, he is unable to obviously keep up with his father, and there's an element of him just kind of feeling like he's defeated. So there's quite a defeated tone in some ways at the beginning. I do think that there's it's interesting because it begins here saying like, oh, I could never be as good as you, and then as it comes here it's just like, haha, now I'm better than you because now I'm grown up and you're the one hobbling because you're old and I'm the youthful man. So it kind of takes a little turn. I think it does in quite a respectful tone. However, we will explore it a little bit more. I think there are many poems you can compare this with. One which is quite obvious is Before You Were Mine, because you have, in Before You Were Mine, you have the child who is looking back at her mother's past, the same way that the speaker here or the narrator is looking back at his father's past or their past that they shared together. The difference, however, is that the child here is actually sharing the past with the father, whereas Before You Were Mine, the child wasn't a part of her mother's life before. Okay, there is a similarity, however, that they're both kind of in awe or kind of idolise their parents in a certain way. So let's get started with the context. So Seamus Heaney, he was actually, so you can connect this specifically, this poem, to his own experiences, because he was from a farming family. One reason you might find this poem quite difficult to understand is because it has a lot of, it has a lexical cluster of words, or semantic field, but lexical cluster of words, I always like to use that, related to farming. I will literally just get that down for you now so you can copy me. Shadows aren't ideal, are they? They're not, but well. So lexical, and it's green, fantastic. Lexical cluster of words. Lexis is literally just a fancy way of just saying terms, so it's like a cluster of terms, lexical cluster of words linking to farming. And I'm going to do a little arrow so that you can connect it, so you have it there. Lexical cluster of words linking to farming. Okay, so you could connect that to Seamus Heaney's personal experiences. His father was actually a cattle dealer, so that's, once again, you can connect it specifically to this. Early poetry focused on childhood experiences, identity and rural life. Okay, so he was obviously able to gain a personal insight as to what the rural life is actually like. So you could say in some ways that this is, I'd say, perhaps a dramatic monologue because there's no one who speaks back, and it is relating to his own experiences. So you may want to get that down on the side here, that it is I believe it would be a dramatic monologue. Okay, so follower. Follower suggests it is literal and metaphorical. So I've written that down there. It's literal because the son would literally follow the father, watching him do his ploughing the field, the farming field. If you guys don't understand what ploughing is, it is definitely worth just googling, like just plough or ploughing. It's something which you don't see often. You actually sometimes see it in Richmond Park, but that's only because they're trying to keep to old traditions. But it's where you will essentially use lawnmowers now and things like that. But it's where you would use horses to carry this machine whilst you're on the back of, the back of the horses and kind of dragging this machine through fields in order to fertilise the soil or to cut the soil or to do whatever you have to do. Okay, so follower is literal because the son wants to follow the footsteps, or was literally following the footsteps, watching him plough these fields so that he was able to mimic the duties which he'd have to then take on board when he was older and when he got the farm himself. It's metaphorical because he's desperate to want to follow the lead of his father. It's metaphorical because he wants to become essentially his father, and mimic kind of who his father was, because he obviously had a lot of respect for his dad. So the first verse will start. So my father worked with a horse plough. His shoulders globed like a full sail strung. Between the shafts and the furrow, the horse strained at his clicking tongue. So there's some things that you might not understand here. Things like furrow. So I've got some terminology down here. So this is why it's worth kind of looking at or understanding ploughing fields. So furrow, I've got it here and you guys can copy it down. So it's the long trench made by ploughing. So essentially, say this is bird's eye view. The horse would like carry the machine this way down the field, which would create kind of like a indent, a trench within the fields. Okay, so the furrow is specific to ploughing. It links to that lexical cluster of words linking to farming. Okay, so there's loads of visual imagery here. So the visual imagery, there's imagery. Shows the son as like a spectator, someone who is kind of learning from his father, but not yet ready to do it. So there's a certain thing of maybe him feeling inadequate or him feeling a bit useless on the sideline, wanting to get involved, but his skill set won't allow him. It also suggests him being maybe jealous or maybe a bit frustrated with himself that he's unable to acquire such skills that his dad seems to naturally portray in the farming field or ploughing field. Okay, so work with a horse plough, you should understand that. His shoulders globed like a full sail strung. So this, the simile here, what it's talking about, full sail, is using like the imagery of like a ship, because when ships, here's my drawings again. So when ships, and it's a really, really windy day, this is going to be the worst drawing yet, I can tell. So when it's a really, really windy day, and let's say that the wind is blowing this way, the sail of the boat, that's water, the sail of the boat will be blowing that way and it'll be arched like that. So it says the full sail strung, his shoulders were globed. So the same way that the sail here is globed, he's talking about his father's shoulders being globed like a full sail strung. What could this show? This could show his father is maybe damaged from hard work. Obviously working in a ploughing field, it is pretty laborious. You do have to do it day in, day out. There's no escaping it because you've got a whole business to run, and that all is quite pivotal to ensure that you're ploughing, you stay on top of it. So his father's damaged from hard working, maybe because he has an arched back. Yeah, sometimes when you see older men, and women, they often have an arched kind of spine. Could show how hard working he is as well. So get that down as well. Show how he's been hard working, always bent down and doing his work. I suppose in some ways this could link to a little bit Letters from Yorkshire, when she's there's that guy planting his potatoes and working really hard. You kind of have the same work ethic there, so you may want to make a slight reference to that, just in case there's a moment where you actually think, no, actually, miss, I don't think this connects to Before You Were Mine. I prefer it with another poem. Between the shafts and the furrow. So shafts is the poles which connect the animal to the plough. Okay, so you'd have the horses essentially with a pole on their harness, which would connect them to the plough so that they can pull it along. So that's what it relates to as well. I'm just going to circle all of this kind of unusual terminology for ploughing. The horse strained at his clicking tongue. So strained, there's loads of active verbs. So the use of visual imagery, there's also kinesthetic, which is movement, instead of just active verbs. Kinesthetic. Kinesthetic. Kinesthetic imagery. To show maybe his never-ending work, or to show how hardworking he was. Also, the horse is quite a metaphorical kind of reflection of how he was also being strained. So there's kind of a certain element of maybe the end of his dad's ability to actually continue with this type of work, and that's why it's so important that his son needs to follow his steps so that the farming business can proceed. So maybe there's an element of him, the writer, recognising that his dad is, although he's a hard worker, he's clearly straining. There's clearly an element of strength involved, but also slowly crippling nature of the job, where he's not going to be, the father's not going to be able to work for the rest of his life. So the narrator is kind of feeling a little bit under pressure to take on this job. An expert, very similar to Before You Were Mine, where she mentions Marilyn, full stop. So it's the same way that they're using the use of caesura here. Caesura is spelled Caesura. So the use of caesura here, same way with Marilyn, it's used to emphasise their opinions of their parent. Both of which is quite similar to the way that they think that they're the best of the best, the creme de la creme. Maybe don't write down creme de la creme. Okay, so it also ensures that the reader thinks about the importance of that to them as well. So the same way the punctuation makes this important to us, it reflects how important this sentence is to the speaker. Okay, and that's what Seamus Heaney did. So you need to kind of connect why the caesura has been used by Seamus Heaney to reflect the poets, to make us feel that it's important, because it's the same way it's important to them, blah, blah, blah. He would set the wing and fit the bright steel pointed sock, the sod rolled over without breaking, at the head rig and single pluck. You have a heavy use of sibilants, not only actually here, but you had it sail strong. Where's my orange highlighter? Sad. So I'm just going to highlight this. SS set steel sock sod single sweating. Okay. I've done enough examples. So the S. What should I do? I'll do my note over here. So the use of the sibilants. Got to think about what it does in order for you to actually get the marks. So the sibilants, let's see what we can think or infer that it might be doing here. He would set the wing and fit the bright steel pointed sock and the sod rolled over without breaking at the head rig with single pluck. Okay, so the use of, in some ways the sibilance is quite plosive, so it makes you go, you can hear it, okay? What does it do to the pace, sibilance? It slows it down, so it slows pace. Maybe to show how careful the father was. how particular and meticulous, which means when you do something to absolute perfection, how meticulous maybe the father was. Also, when I was linked back to my point, I'm not going to fit it in here, but you can get it down if you understand it. The use of plosive sounds potentially could show kind of the pain endured through the hard work, just because there's the sound which we kind of get whilst we're reading it, which is an uncomfortable sound, the same way that the work of the farming would also be uncomfortable for the father. I hope you got that. The sod rolled over without breaking, and the head rig with a single pluck. So we have once again some terminology specific for ploughing. So we've got head rig. Head rig is the area of land at the end of the field used for turning the plough. So you would literally get in a field, a farming field, this is bird's eye view again, you would have the farmer going down this way, and then he'd do a big old turn, go that way, big old turn, go that way, go that way. So he'd do this kind of like looping motion with his horses. And that's what the head rig is. It's this point, wait 1 second, is this point, the bit where they turn, okay? And he does it with a single pluck. That phrase there suggests that he does it so easily, and the fact that the speaker and the narrator kind of, in some ways, it's called bathos, by the way, when you exaggerate something. It's a Latin term. It's almost to show the simplicity. The bathos here suggests the simplicity of the duties. Or the way that the father finds the actions of turning around in the head rig so simple and so easy, almost not even bearing a thought. He's on autopilot because he's done it pretty much his whole life. The fact that the poet Seamus Heaney, he's chosen the speaker to use this bathos. It suggests that the speaker is maybe quite jealous or amazed or in awe of his father's abilities, which he does not have. All right. Off reins, the sweating team turned around and back into the land, his eye narrowed and angled at the ground, mapping the furrow exactly. We've got another term used in ploughing, furrow. So it is the long trench made by ploughing. It's something which we just visited. Something which we've already visited. Of rains that sweating team turned around and back to the team. Once again, you've got quite the plosive sounds here. Team turned. Yeah, it's kind of spitty letters to suggest maybe the uncomfortable nature of the job. So he turned around and back into the land, his eyes narrowed and angled at the ground. The way that it angled at the ground and it narrowed, it shows an element of him. So these verbs, one sec. They're not just verbs, they're movement verbs, and I've said it up there, it's called kinesthetic. So the kinesthetic imagery, or you can say the dynamic verbs, is another way of getting around it if you don't like, or even attempting to spell kinesthetic, which I do not blame you. You can also say dynamic verbs. Dynamic just means movement, and they're movement verbs. So the fact that it's narrowed and angled shows his hard work. It emphasises the way that he is very active and physical within his job. Then we have a really interesting shift. So you have him here in the three verses. He's here as the spectator. So the speaker, the narrator, is someone who is just watching his father. So spectator. All right. So you've got 3 verses, and he's just like, my father would do this, my father would do that. He's really good at his job. And then boom, we go into first, or we do the personal pronoun. To suggest that maybe now that he's watched his father for so long, he's now started to develop his own identity. He's developed his own person. He's feeling more comfortable within himself, which is a great comparison to Before You Were Mine, because it's not really shown that the narrator speaking really ever feels comfortable with themselves, and only possesses quite a bit of jealousy or kind of defeatist kind of tone where they don't believe they'll ever be as good and have as much fun as their parent did. So I stumbled in his hobnail wake. So he's slowly becoming more confident, or this is also used as a comparative, linking back to the title of him wanting to follow his dad. He's like, you do that, but in comparison, I do that. So notice how, because this is focused on the father, notice how there'll be a shift in description. There'll be more description of accuracy and competency within the job, whereas the final 3 verses, it will be more on maybe clumsy mistakes or the more critical opinion of himself and his own abilities. So I stumbled in his hobnail wake, fell sometimes on the polished sod, sometimes he rode me on his back, dipping and rising in his plod. So we have hobnailed, that is once again linking to something specific to the ploughing field. It is boots, which have had nails hammered into the bottom for extra grip. Because if you think about the soil in a ploughing field, it would just be ridiculously it has to be fertile and soft and mushy. So you would need hobnail boots in order to ensure that you're not slipping around the place. So I stumbled in his hobnail wake. This once again links to Before You Were Mine, because if you remember, the child, or when the narrator was a child, she put her hand inside of the mother's relics, her shoes, her red shoes, the same way that he is putting his feet into his shoes. However, you kind of get from Before You Were Mine, it's more kind of like, it's more of a negative takeover. It's more of like the child kind of like took over the mother's life in a negative way, whereas here you have the child taking over the father's duties in a positive way, in a way that's more respectable. So the verb here, so you still keep with the dynamic verbs or kinesthetic imagery, whichever one you want to refer to, both are okay. There's stumbling, so it shows it's clumsy, not as good or has that expertise that his father has. Fell sometimes on the polished sod, sometimes he rode me on his back. So that shows that sometimes he fell over and the dad was like, come on, I'll help you out, just get on my back and I'll take you back to the house, kind of thing. Dipping and rising in his plod. So you kind of get, you once again get a shift, not only in how the son is slowly becoming more and more of an expert like his father is, but then you kind of get the contrast of the fact that the father started off with such an expert and then becomes something which is ironically how the son started off, which was kind of crippling or someone who was incapable of the job. The reason being is obviously because the father slowly gets older and older and older, and then he becomes more clumsy or incapable of the strength he needs and acquires for the job. Okay, so you have, where is this shown? So the fact that he's dipping and rising, there's plod. When someone's plodding along, it's not, someone's not doing or walking with strength, they're kind of staggering along behind or they're struggling in some ways. So you get this kind of shift here, so perhaps this is something you want to underline. I wanted to grow up and plough, to close one eye, stiffen my arm, all I ever did was follow, in his broad shadow round the farm. So this is his aspiration here. Oh my god, noisy helicopter, fantastic. Okay. All I ever did was follow. So this kind of shows that he's, in some ways, I feel like he's being a little bit kind of, Dad, look, now I'm better than you. So in some ways there's a childish nature, childish tone to this narrator, because he's just like, well, all I ever wanted to do was follow. Now look at you, you're plodding along behind. In this broad shadow around the farm. So this is metaphorical. He's saying that he was following his shadow. Kind of, it links to his desperation to be like the father. Similar kind of way, I guess. Mother Any Distance does in a bit, in some ways. However, this the opportunity for him to follow in his father's footsteps is more possible and more positive. Whereas Before You Were Mine it's slightly more negative. It's kind of like, oh, you used to be this person, but I'll never be as good as you. In this broad shadow round the farm, so this metaphor shows that he wants to be like his father's shadow. He wants to literally mimic everything that he is. Okay. I was a nuisance. I was. There's past tense here. So here we have the element of him being useless. However, here he's saying, I was a nuisance, but however, now I'm not. You could connect this phrase, I was a nuisance, to the fact that it says, all I ever did was follow. So you've got the past tense. All I was a nuisance, and you have the change, evidence of change here. All right, so you have the rule of 3. I was a nuisance, tripping, falling, yapping, always. Really good thing to use in your creative writing, by the way, just a side note. I've noticed some kids using this really effectively, rule of 3. So I was a nuisance. So he felt like he was a pain, tripping, falling, yapping, always. So the rule of 3 of using these verbs, it shows the continuous, almost annoying, repetitive faults which the son used to have when he was younger, and his father would have to try and educate him. But today it is my father who keeps stumbling behind me and will not go away. Yeah, you kind of get like a bit of a mean feeling from the poet here. He's saying that almost in some ways, so at the beginning it was his father having to lug his son on the back and just being like, come on, you're useless, just get on my back, we'll go home. And then right at the end, you have that it's just like, well, look who's a nuisance now, and now you're stumbling behind me and you're not going away. So it's changed the meaning of the follower, same way it changes over time, because you have him following his father, but then you have the father following him and stumbling along behind. So you could connect that quite nicely to the title there. I absolutely love the use of structure here. Seamus Heaney, I know some kids are cynical about, writers, did they actually mean to do it that way, or are we just over-analysing? He actually has broken down his poem and said specifically that he's done structure incredibly well, which I would agree. So the first point of structure is how the first 3 verses is kind of linking to, the spectator, whereas here it's more personal and it's more just like, well, look at how I've developed. Another thing on structure is the use of enjambment. For instance, single pluck of reins. So this enjambment, where it goes there, down to there, which is the continuation of a line without any punctuation onto the next. The same way that we're forced to follow with our eyes this way to that, it mimics, watch this, it mimics the movement of the farming of them on the field. So when a horse would plough a field, go that way and that way. The same way, look at the way that the pen goes on to the next, onto the next. The same way this use of enjambment, it brings it quite easily onto the next. It shows that his father's ability to kind of plough the fields was with great ease. It was, but it could also reflect how, like we've kind of mentioned in other poems, in our analysis in other poems, how the son wants to follow the nature of his father. You also have a very neat structure, so nothing is complicated. They're all very consistent. It's all in quatrains, which is line of 4. You have trisets, which is lines of 3 in a verse, but this is quatrains when it's 4. Okay, so really neat structure. It shows maybe the way that his father, or reflects the way his father was very meticulous in his job. There are whole and full rhymes, so it's quite interesting. I will show you what I mean. So we have plough, tongue. So how am I going to make this clear for you? So plough and tongue. These are half rhymes because you have the sounding, so plough, tongue. They do rhyme, whether you like it or not, just agree with me. So the half rhyme here maybe is to show at the beginning that he was incomplete and only half his dad. He was only half good enough. And then you have at the end, you have the full rhymes: falling, stumbling, today, away. Yeah, so it's changed to full rhymes to show that he's now complete. Now he is his dad. He mimics his dad's shape, his personality, his who he wanted to be, his shadow. Whereas at the beginning, he just wasn't good enough. You also have the use of the ABAB CD structure. Is that consistent? Let me just check. Actually, do we? So wake, back, sod, plod. Yeah, we do. So it's very consistent, the rhyme scheme as well, maybe to show their close relationship or to show how he wanted to mimic his dad. What we say that the tone is. Aspirational. Element of jealousy. I'd say there's a slight bitter, you'd have to argue this point, but there's a slight bitter tone because he doesn't come across very understanding or appreciative of the fact that his dad is an oldie and might need a little bit more support. The same way that his dad seemed to have supported him through the knowing of how to plough a field. After the howing, I'm going to turn off this video now. I hope that this helped. So it is a true story, by the way. He was worried about how his dad would interpret the poem. So it is a true reflection. You can make that accurately, that accurate analysis in your essay. All right, guys. Bye. Thank you.